Can you talk about where we get the idea of age of accountability, and do babies go to heaven when they die? Yeah, this is good questions. These are questions that often naturally arise as you progress throughout life. And we can pull a lot from Paul in the book of Romans. In Romans chapter 7, verse 9, Paul says this. He says, I was alive once without the law, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. Now, this is very interesting the way that Paul is saying this, because Paul is saying, I was alive once without the law. Now, this isn't saying that Paul died. This is him talking in a metaphorical sense. He's saying, I was alive once without the law. And so what this is alluding to, or what it seems that it's alluding to, is that this seems that Paul is talking about his childhood, meaning that when Paul was at a very early age in life, nobody knows what that actual age is, he didn't understand the difference between right and wrong. But then in verse 9, as you continue, it says, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. Meaning that there was a point, Paul is basically saying that there was a point in his life where he had no idea that he was doing right or wrong. But then there came a time in his life when he did realize that he was doing right or wrong. And so that is when that sin revived, because it became real to him. He understood, and when he understood, then he died, spiritually speaking. And so this is interesting to see what Paul is talking about here. So this gives you the idea of the age of accountability, which nobody knows what the actual age is. It could be 6, it could be 7, 8, 9, 10. It's different for each individual, I would assume, because everybody matures at a different rate. When you go on to 2 Samuel chapter 12, this is another interesting thing to consider, because in 2 Samuel chapter 12, David's child is on the brink of death. And in verse 19, it says, when David saw that his servants were whispering, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said to his servants, is the child dead? And they said, he is dead. So David arose from the ground, washed and anointed himself, and changed his clothes, and he went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house. And when he requested, they set food before him, and he ate. Then his servants said to him, what is this that you have done? You fasted and wept for the child while he was alive, but when the child died, you arose and ate food. And he said, while the child was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who can tell whether the Lord will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. And so this is a good thing to pull from, because what we see here is that David had the understanding that even though his child had died, David somehow knew that David himself was going to go to his own son. And so that's really remarkable, because that shows a level of understanding that David had at this point in his life, to recognize that when David himself died, that he was going to be reunited with his own child. And that was something that David understood. And if David understood that, then that's something we can understand as well. That's something that we can pull on. And it's so interesting, because David also understood that he would recognize his child when he was home in heaven. And so if you want to build on top of that, in Job chapter 1, if you want to go to, in Job chapter 1, we all are very familiar with the story of Job. In Job chapter 1 verse 2, it says, and 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Now Job, we all know the story of Job. He went through the gauntlet. He went through the blender. But in the beginning, before all that takes place, we learn that Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now at the end, after Job gets out of the blender, it says in Job 42 that the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. So at the beginning, Job had a certain amount of everything. Let's just say he had 10 of everything. But then at the end of Job, we see that that the Lord restored to Job twice as much. So at the beginning, he had 10 of everything, and at the end, he had 20 of everything. And so that's really kind of cool. But what's interesting is in verse 13. In Job 42, verse 13, we see that it says very specifically, he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. So it seems like a contradiction, because at the beginning in Job 1, you see that Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters. In Job 42, after we're told that the Lord restored to him twice as much as what he had before, we see that he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. So somebody could easily say, oh, he wasn't given twice as much. But this is where perspective comes into play, because it's not about how I think or how you think. It's not about our perspective. It's from God's perspective. Because those 7 sons and 3 daughters that Job lost in Job chapter 1, Job received 7 other sons and 3 other daughters. And so just because the idea that's going on here is just because somebody passes away doesn't mean that they're still not yours. And so Job was given twice as much, meaning that the 7 sons and 3 daughters that he received the second time around were added to the first 7 sons and the first 3 daughters. So from a heavenly perspective, Job was given twice as much children. And so Job was going to be reunited with those first 7 sons and 3 daughters. And I think that's pretty neat, because he was going to recognize them. He's going to recognize them. He does recognize them because he's home with the Lord right now. And that is something cool. So when you do just the recap over everything that we talked about, Paul, he recognized that there was a time in his life where he didn't know better. He didn't know left or right, up or down. He didn't know right or wrong. But then there came a time in his life when he grew up old enough to where he recognized right and wrong, and that was when sin revived and he died spiritually. And so that is what the law does. When you continue reading in 2 Samuel and in the story of Job, you see that David had the understanding that he was going to go be with his son. And so that's kind of cool. David understood a lot. And then when you couple that with what Job was going on here, Job was given 7 sons and 3 daughters at the beginning. He received twice as much at the end of the book of Job, but it still just painted a picture of 7 sons and 3 daughters, which implies that the first 7 sons and 3 daughters were still in play from a heavenly perspective. And that's pretty neat to hold on to right there. It's encouraging. These are the kind of understandings that are important to hold on to when you're going through hard times, because we're all going through life. Life is very difficult and it's challenging, and we lose loved ones, and that's just part of it, which is not how it was ever meant to be. But this is why it's good to know the word, because this is what you can hold on to. This is a light. This is a flashlight. Holding on to your Bible and knowing your Bible is basically holding on to a flashlight. And so this is what, the psalmist tells us, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And so if you know it, then you're going to avoid the potholes that life throws at you, and you're going to be able to walk through the fog a little bit more clearly. And so hopefully this helps answer your question.